Yeah, welcome everyone. It's really lovely to be here today. So you might remember the news story where Alex Cunningham MP asked in Prime Minister's Question Times why 34% of children in his constituency were living in poverty. He got a less than polite response, which you can see on the screen, which I will not read aloud for fear of offending our American friends who may be less accustomed to salty British language. But I think the question is, how did Alex Cunningham get the statistic about the number of children living in poverty in his constituency? So that's what we're going to talk about today. I'm Freya and I'm from Action for Children. We're going to be talking about a tool that Action for Children produced, but it was actually produced before I joined Action for Children, so that's why Christopher's here to join me today. And this is the pitch from Joe before I hand over to Christopher. So Joe Derry Hall, who you might have met yesterday, works with Glyn Thomas at a company called We Could Even, which is a small creative agency specialising in engaging networks. And they're trying to push the boundaries of what's possible without a big agency budget, from page templates to different creative ways of engaging supporters, like the example we're going to talk about today. We've worked quite a lot with We Could Even in our engaging networks work, and they've been really brilliant. So I really wanted the platform Joe today, but unfortunately he wasn't able to make it, so going to be channeling him. Over to you, Christopher.
I'm Christopher. I'm at Plan International UK, but previously at Action for Children, and was involved in the development of this tool. So, what was the problem? Child poverty has been rising for over a decade in the UK, and we know that child poverty is harmful to childhoods and damaging to children's later life chances. It's an issue that cuts across all of the work that Action for Children do, and was identified by practitioners as the #1 problem faced by children and families they support. But we'd seen the kind of huge impact the temporary increase in universal credit had on reducing poverty, and it was on that hope that we wanted to build. So therefore, public and political pressure was required to make the case for action and policies that would bring child poverty falling. One route for that pressure is the tool that we're going to showcase to you today. Oh, no, gone too far. Oh, no. So the concept started with a conversation between myself and the Child Poverty Policy Lead. We knew that MPs love a little bit of local data, and we also had some success with data sheets and data viz tools like Flourish. But the user experience wasn't that great for someone who was trying to dig into data local to them. And as part of we were part of the End Child Poverty Coalition, so we had access to local poverty stats, but we knew there was a whole load of other data that was available to us at a local level, providing insight into child hardship. This included free school meals, food bank usage, fuel poverty, universal credit, and a load more. So our starting idea was to bring all these data points into a one-stop shop. And this led to the policy team, very excitingly, coming up with a great idea of producing a really awesome Excel spreadsheet, to which I was very politely broke all the rules of creative ideation and said, yes and, but no. So we said, let's keep thinking, and what can we do? So our main objectives were to catch the attention of decision makers by showing rich, informative content, to develop a more nuanced representation of child hardship statistics, something that would build understanding, empathy, a sense of urgency, and with a clear call to action. And internally, it was also quite important for us to improve our user experience of our digital tools. In terms of our key challenges, we had a very limited budget, so the aim was to launch a pilot tool that we could test and iterate if early results proved promising. And with no resource for additional research, we had to work within the kind of confines and limitations of the data that we could access. So in terms of how we decided on what data to include, we researched available data, making sure we recorded exceptions and limitations, and prioritised that data based on, was it available at a local level with a good coverage across the UK? When brought together, did it show a broad range of the impacts of child hardship and poverty? Was it readily understood? Could people, our supporters, decision makers, quickly understand it? And did it create a response in the viewer? Thank you. A key thing to flag is that the data that we settled on was not without its own challenges. It was a mixture of local authority and constituency data. There were some gaps in the data for certain areas, and some data was collected differently by different nations. However, by identifying these at the start of the project, we were able to address each of them in design, which Joe will talk about later, we will have said, and finally, we didn't have the expertise to build this internally. So we reached out to We Could Even, trying not to be too prescriptive with what we wanted the tool to kind of look like or even do. Instead, we focused on what the outcomes we wanted to achieve, and we kind of collaborated from there. And now I'm going to pass over to Freya to do a little demo of the tool.
Great, thank you so much. So it's quite a quick little walkthrough, and this was Joe's bit, so I'm going to do my absolute best to nail everything he was going to say. But we're going to show a QR code on the last slide so you can have a look through the tool yourself as well. So if you feel like you've missed something but you'd want to have a look at it before you ask us questions, you can absolutely do that then. So I'm going to press next and hope that the video will play. Is that someone from AV possibly could click play to the video for me? Oh, perfect. So yeah, this is a little taster. So on this first page, you can either click your specific constituency or put your postcode in. We added the constituency finder, so it's easier to look up other people's constituencies where you might not know their postcode. And then you can see like some quite shocking statistics for your local area. And there's a little bit of an explainer there which tells you a bit more. Like, you've not just got the statistic, you can pop down a lot more information about what child poverty is, what it means, its effect on children and young people. And then we've got these different graphs as well for different local areas, a whole range of different graphs to make it quite visually interesting. And really, we thought about each piece of data and what kind of graph would do best to tell that story. And then for people who are quite interested in like what the actual data source is with a policy head, there's also a pop-up so you can see the exact source of the data and take it back to where it came from, so nothing's being non-referenced. And then we also shared the experiences of specific children and their families to really help bring home the issues that people are facing and kind of include those personal case studies, not just the numbers as well. So yeah, this is just a super kind of quick taster, which we'll kind of scroll through to the end, but we'll come back to it. And we can kind of talk you through it a little bit more as well. And I'm just going to take you through some kind of highlights of some of the things that we want to specifically talk about that we think work really well in the tool. Over to you, Christopher.
So in terms of the human connection we wanted to create, obviously we're here to talk to you about data, and the data we kind of assembled was pretty stark and quite powerful, but one of the dangers we kind of realised at the start was getting too focused on that. We wanted people to relate to the people behind these statistics, and we worked hard to kind of give it a human face. A lot of that was in kind of images we chose. At the start of the part, when we kicked off the project, that was using kind of stock imagery, but as we've progressed through the project, we've been able to replace that with images taken by actual children. And with the stories and examples to kind of take kind of people into that human reality of what is behind those numbers and stats. Secondly, obviously, another peril of working with data is it can kind of overwhelm the audience, especially with the kind of amount of data that kind of we could include in the tool. So showing key data clearly, using those big numbers, icons where possible, graphs, making them very simple, as simple as possible, keeping text length short, particularly using mobile devices, and just trying to keep it kind of as accessible as possible. The option to hide optional content, so there's explainers about the data sources, case studies, so the kind of, the short as short as possible, but with the ability to kind of dig in deeper if that was what you were looking for. Cool.
And then one other thing we really wanted to make clear but also kind of flexible was having a call to action. So there's a little kind of floating CTA bar. So there are different versions of the tool. Some of them only have 3 data points, and some might have as many as 10 or 11. So that's a lot of screens. So we've made it so people can always jump to the end and jump straight into the action if they want to. We can attach any kind of different CTAs to this depending on what engaging networks form we build at the end, and I'll come back to that a bit later. And we also had this really great function, which I would never occur to me that we could do if an agency hadn't told us, which is that it generates a PDF briefing for every single MP with their local data in it, and that's done with a piece of code. So we didn't have to mail merge 650 PDFs, then upload them all somewhere and link them all. It's all auto-generated, but that means that they've got something they can both interact with visually and just take away a really basic form that's got all that information in there as well, which I think is really good. And then one thing to say as well is that that I think really works really well with this is that this is a flexible tool that we can keep adding to. So for example, we developed a new policy ask around the 2-child limit. So we put in a whole new section about the 2-child limit, and we didn't really need too much extra work on that. We can replace the data sources when the data changes. We can replace the images. We can really work a lot with it, which is really lovely because sometimes if you get an agency in to build something really beautiful for you, it's beautiful, but it's also fragile, and you end up left kind of a bit not sure how you can work with it and how you can adapt it, which means you're not always making the most of all of that time and effort that's gone into it. So that DIY editing has been really, really helpful. It's just mostly using the text block feature rather than code. And then, yeah, I'm going to talk now a little bit about how it went down. So in terms of how it was used, we shared it with supporters, mostly with warm supporters, both with people who'd campaigned with us before and people who donated before. We sent it directly to MPs, but we also asked for our supporters to send it to MPs. But unexpectedly, we also found it was used quite a lot by journalists, by local authorities and by other charities using it as a real information source rather than just like an engagement tool, which is really brilliant. And then internally, our fundraising and corporate partnerships team found it really helpful for building local relationships, developing pitches, telling local partners about the situation in their area. And then we also took it with us live to Party Conference. We had it on a slightly adapted version. We had it on an iPad, and we were taking people through it there and then, which was a really great way to take people and say, these are our policy asks. Let me tell you what's going on in your local area on this issue. So that worked really well. In terms of numbers, they're still fairly small in that it's kind of mostly a pilot project that's mostly gone out to warm supporters, but it's been used about 5,000 times. We built a Google dashboard to track that because, as you might have seen, it doesn't take email addresses, but at the moment it's not logging people through engaging networks, but it would be really easy to build it to do that, so that could be an option. And yeah, it seemed to have about 20% conversion rate for people going on to email their MP. And then we saw that MPs use the tool roughly 1,000 times. Obviously, there aren't 1,000 MPs, so we imagine that'll be quite a few MPs kind of coming back to it, which is really nice and really encouraging as well. And there was a real flexibility of the different versions. So we have over time added quite a few different call to actions on with just straightforward conventional engaging networks pages. So we built a send yourself the tool form that people could use to kind of send themselves a link to the tool. So that was what we did live at the conference. People could come back to it. We mostly focused on email your MP, but at another time when we had to pause that, we had it with a hand raiser. And then another time we ran a much shorter version with a donation ask at the end because our fundraising colleagues were really interested in using it for fundraising. And then in terms of future use, we'd quite like to see how we can use it in a welcome journey as part of developing that engagement, giving people something a bit like deeper to get involved in rather than just a kind of quite simple hand raiser. We'd like to see if we could localize the case studies as well as the data. And obviously we're really keen to use it ahead of the election in terms of speaking to candidates or new MPs. The only challenge being that the borders are changing for the constituencies, which means all of the data across 11 data sources is going to be different now. So that's a challenge for us to consider. So that's pretty much everything. And I just want to talk a little bit about the key things that we'd love for you to take away from this session, which are that it's great to try and work with data and make the most of the data out there. So pretty much none of this data came from our research. It came from data that was already out there and our partnership with the End Child Poverty Coalition. So they published the child poverty stats for every local area, which were our leading stats. They also published the 2-child limit stats. We shared it in partnership with them, but it wasn't necessarily our data. We worked really closely with our policy and research colleagues who really understand this data and can help us make the most of it and fill in the gaps and that kind of thing. And it's really great if you can explore the different uses of engaging networks reference data function. And I actually have another slide about that I thought we might not have time for. So if anyone wants to ask me a question about reference data, please do. And then in terms of making the most of agency support, so the name of the company we worked with is We Could Even. The idea is you go to them with an idea and they say, well, we could even do this, which I think is quite a nifty way of looking at it. And it's really nice if you can go in with open questions and create something really flexible, create something you can use long term, and also think beyond the boundaries of a familiar EN page format and do something really quite different, but actually still just using an engaging networks page, which is what we've done. So yeah, we'd love to take some questions, and if you want to use that QR code, you can look up the tool and have a little scroll through it and ask us any questions kind of live while we're here. And Joe's details are on that, so if you wanted to follow up with Joe with any questions as well, I'm sure he'd love to hear from you because he was really keen to be here to talk today.
All right, round of applause. All right, we have a few questions coming in here. The first question was, and maybe you answered this, I didn't hear it, but how long did it take, like from the concept to it being out the door to build?
Yeah, going back, I think it's probably only about, so can you hear me okay, couple of months. It was pretty quick. We did spin it up, and most of that was the data gathering. And deciding what we wanted to include. Other than that, I'd say about 6 weeks to 2 months in terms of then concept, build, and launching.
And I'd say it takes about a day and a half once or twice a year to refresh all the data, and because new data is published maybe yearly or slightly more frequently. So we've had a couple of refreshes of the data, and that's taken a bit of time for our policy team to gather all the data. But we've had it now running for over a year, so it didn't take that long to build, and we've tried to keep it fresh and keep it online.
I mean, I was expecting to hear something longer than 2 months, but that's amazing.
There's some elements of it which, so for example, all the case studies, you can change them out for, so based on your postcode. So if we didn't do that for launch. They were the same case studies and lived experience across all of them, but we could even build it so that could all be localised as well, but some things we didn't.
The constituency lookup, so we originally just had the postcode lookup, but we realised that made it really hard to look up other people's postcodes or anyone else's constituency, so we added that in later. There's a few things we added in later, but I think the original version was quite quick to...
And this was all, I'm just making sure, this was all reference data in a custom database that you uploaded into, an ET.
Yeah,
and people put in their posts. I mean, I love it. It's really great.
Okay. It's literally a spreadsheet. So we worked. We could even, they basically gave us the Excel spreadsheet in terms of how to fill it in. I will say that the policy team, although I made a joke at that expense earlier, were amazing, and they filled all that in. But that was it really. And then it's just, and I was saying, I know that slide was hard to, wasn't the most exciting slide in terms of the back end bit, but the ease of it is, I was quite amazed of that. It is all just text boxes we can go into and just keep that, the copy. It's very, very flexible.
Did you track any new supporters from the tool? Did you see an uptick in acquisition?
Yes, we did trial it for acquisition in advertising, but I think because it doesn't, at the moment, log people's emails, they had to get through quite a lot of steps and then go onto a hand raiser, and that was a bit slow for people. I probably, instead of using it for upfront acquisition, use it as part of a welcome journey, or use it as a kind of engagement thing and then follow up with those people with Facebook ads, something to get them in. But we have seen, at the moment, it's just on our website, it's not even that well promoted, to be honest. And I've seen people come in completely fresh, use the tool, go straight through, email their MP, go straight through, and then donate at the end, and we got £100 off a completely cold supporter through that. So I think there are people who are willing to do that journey, even when we're not pushing it, they're kind of finding it. But obviously it would be nice if we could do a bit more to make it, we want to do a bit of work to make it really highlighted on our website, so it's a really nice asset people can find really easily. It's slightly hidden at the moment, and that's the next step for me, really.
But I'm sorry, go ahead.
I think search is quite important, especially when the local stats gets published. Obviously, there is quite a lot of traffic looking at child poverty and local stats. So I think making sure that we are high in that search and this tool is a really great way of bringing people into the work that actual children do in the area.
And did you say that on that first page, you're not collecting an email address? Yeah,
so you really easily could make it to collect email addresses. I think we didn't, just because we wanted people to see it as a tool that they could just get involved in. Yeah. And I think you could also add it, we've had a version of it which had a hand raiser at the end rather than email your MP, so hopefully increase sign-ups rather than, because people might be more keen to sign up. It'd be really simple to add the email onto the front. We just didn't, because we were trying to make it as easy as possible to get people to engage with. But it actually has been really challenging for us. So for example, there was a big gap in our KPIs. But I know that 5,000 people took this action, but I haven't got that on Engaging Network. So trying to blend that with my other data to say who those 5,000 people are has actually been quite tricky. So there definitely there's been kind of kinks to work out. But that's just how we've done it. And I think, like I said, you could take a similar concept to Joe and Glyn or somebody else, and I think they could do a completely different thing that really works for you and what you want to get out of it,
And there's other things you could do. We thought about having a pop-up during the journey, which kind of, enjoying this tool kind of thing, give, find out to hear more from us. But again, it's more important things than internal KPIs, and the key thing for us was for people to see the issue and kind of connect with it and want to take action. So that's what we did.
Very cool. One more question. The custom PDFs that were sent to the MPs, was that through Engaging Networks? How did those get built
Yeah.
and sent?
So I don't know a lot about how this was done, but basically Joe set up like a separate like PDF builder through some code. So people, it was still all on the Engaged Networks page. An MP would just click on a link, and it was tailored so each constituency page obviously has their own URL, and so each of those would then generate a PDF that like pulled the reference data through and would personalize it.
Yeah, so basically what we did was we just created the Word document and with the briefing, the branding and everything, and then it was like every bit that we wanted the local data to come in, it was just literally like, you know, brackets, insert, column, X here, and then Joe just took that Word document and then just plugged it into Engaging Networks so that it kind of gets downloaded as a PDF with the local data inserted in the right places. It was as simple as that. It was really, really, not a lot of work for us. We had to create one briefing, basically. Yeah.
Okay, the last question was, you were able to see how many MPs were using the tool. How were you able to see how many MPs were using it?
Yeah, that's a good question. So we have got like Google tracking set up through like bits of code on all of our Engaging Networks pages. And then our analytics team built some dashboards where we can track which page people landed on, how many people moved on to the next page, things like that. I haven't been able to dig into it as much as I would have liked to kind of see if there was things where one MP was coming back to it 10 times and things like that. But that's a kind of rough number of the number of visits that we had. And I previously, before coming to Action for Children, had never used Google Analytics within Engaging Networks. I'd always just used the internal tracking, and that's been really, really helpful. And actually, there's a lot you can do with that. So, yeah.
And just to add to that, one other thing we did was, so you've got the postcode finder, but we also built it so that you can put the name of the constituency just at the end of the URL, and it skips that bit, and it just goes straight into the data.
Yeah.
So for MPs, we sent them a nice bespoke email with the link straight into their data, so they didn't have to go to it, into that postcode or do the search thing. So basically using that, we can see how many people, like hits were going to, how many clicks were going from those tracked URLs.
Great.
Yeah. And again, another simple thing to kind of make the experience better for decision makers.
Yeah.
Really cool. Thank you very, very much for sharing.
Can I say one more thing about reference data?
Absolutely, go.
No one asked
Reference
me a
data.
question. Have we got one more minute? Is that okay?
Yeah, go.
Oh no, that's maybe the next slide. The next presentation. Oh, I'm sorry.
Oh, no.
Have a good lunch.
It's not lunch.
There we go.
Don't go. Stay there.
There we go. That's the slide I was going to go to. So just to say, like, this is obviously a big piece of work, and if you don't want to do that, but still want to do something with your reference data, obviously you can include it in emails to MPs or councillors or anyone else. There's a little bit of nice code you can do to like put it at the top of the header for your ETT page, and that's quite nice that you're not just using reference data to get to decision makers. You're also saying to your supporter, hey, there are 3,000 young people in your constituency who are relying on you to actually send this email, because sometimes people drop off at that point. And also we did a good piece of work last year where, as well as using just like individual stats that came from the reference data, we actually had like whole additional paragraphs. So we're able to kind of set about 10 different statements. So, you know, the child poverty in your area is the worst in the country. The child poverty in your area is actually not the worst in the country, but it doesn't mean you shouldn't care about it. Child poverty in your area has gone up dramatically recently, and all these different situations. And we inserted those in because I think sometimes if you send everyone the same exact messaging with just different stats in it, that's not necessarily relevant. So we wanted to make sure that actually they were all getting individual messaging. And also you can do that with the creating different versions of the email. But that's much more fiddly to do individually by person, whereas this was actually really straightforward to do. And I can talk to anyone about that who'd be interested in that as well. Sorry, to bring that in last.
Fantastic. Really inspiring work. Thank you so much.